Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio. I'm James Spencer.
I'm Steve Wilkes.
Welcome to the annual Disaster Show.
One of my favorite times of year. It tells me that the holidays are upon us.
Yes, and there are people who are worse off than you.
That's true. That's right. I can feel better about myself.
That's right. I don't have my usual script I usually have in hand. You can find me on Twitter on Basic Brewing, all one word, and you're Basic Brewing underscore ST for some reason.
Yeah. That's all the letters they give me.
We're on the Facebook. We're just everywhere. We're on Stitcher and all that. And thanks to everybody using the Amazon.com link on our basicbrewing.com page, especially during this busy holiday season. You always wear it out, especially during the holiday season. So thanks a lot.
We can't tell by what you bought, so no worries there. Especially that guy with those special little.
Well, I'll show you later on. I'll show you a list of. You can see a list of what people buy. You can't tell who bought what.
That's right.
So that's okay. We're not judgeful.
No,
we're not judging here on the podcast. Anyway,
judgeful,
judgish. And we are also brought to you by the fine folks, Desiree and Dave at High Gravity in Tulsa.
Whoop, whoop.
And they have all kinds of great electric brewing systems for you to configure. Their website, it's really easy to configure electric brewing systems. You can get what I've got, which is the 15-gallon or 62-quart system with the 240-volt Blickman Boyle coil on the bottom of it, and the EV. What is it? The EV. Well, it's a controller that I can't remember what it's called, but it's a controller that controls a pump. So it's a brew in a bag system that you can recirculate your wort through, and it also controls the temperature. You
it's amazing. I know
you brewed with it with me. And you can see Steve and me demonstrate this system if you go to youtube.com/highgravitybrew. And Desiree and Dave have been more than generous in sponsoring the podcast. They've just become our regular sponsor. And so check that system out. I know that a lot of you have bought high gravity systems because you email questions about it, and I forward those on to Desiree. And people have bought them, and people seem to be happy. So anyway, go to highgravitybrew.com. Check them out, and they also have, I believe it's $7.99 flat rate shipping on ingredients and a lot of other things. So check them out at highgravitybrew.com and thank them for their support of Basic Brewing Radio.
Indeed.
This show is also brought to you by Douglas Warzinski's Creek that he sent. It's part of the Solera barrel project. This is the Funky Franciscan beer.
It's my porn name.
The Funky Franciscan. Right. I thought you looked familiar.
I usually go by Hot Wort.
That's where dry hopping has another connotation.
That's right.
But this is an awesome beer. We've been sipping it as we've been sorting through the entries this year. This marks a landmark. Usually we read every single entry, but this year we've trimmed them down. What you will hear is a lot. We're going to be reading a lot of stuff, but it's still only about half of what was sent in. So thanks to everybody who sent in entries. We appreciate your participation, and we enjoyed all of the entries, but I don't know, we just had to be picky this year because we didn't want to do a 2-hour podcast.
That in itself would be a disaster.
That's right. And we have to say thank you to the fine folks at Brew Hauler who are again sponsoring the show and providing the prizes this year. And they have sent not only the Carboy holders thingies, but they have also sent growler holders as well. And so you'll be able to, and I think we have one right here. I don't know if you've seen the smaller, but they're just.
Well, it looks like a.
It's a scrap of sort.
But reminds me of my days in gym and junior high.
Those were required back then. But no, this is the right size to fit a growler, so you can carry that around. Since we don't have the
That's
insulated...
what we called it, junior high.
Carry your growler. You carrying your... Secure your growlers.
That's right.
Anyway, it's a handy thing.
Yes.
It's, since we don't have the... there's not a conflict anymore, since we don't sell the growler coolers anymore. We ran out of those.
Yeah.
So we are free to, freely promote the brew haulers, growler carrier thingies. And these things are awesome. If you don't have a brew hauler for your carboys, especially, you need to get them because, every year we have stories of people dropping carboys on the concrete.
It's a common occurrence.
And it can not only be devastating for your brew day, it can also be dangerous for you as well.
Yep.
So I'm going to take a sip of, vamp for a little while. I'm going to take a sip of beer.
I think that we want to get right into this. This will be exciting. I've had my own brew disaster this year. We won't go into that.
Yours is one that got cut.
Yeah, we cut it.
Well, let's start with one from Douglas Warzinski, who brewed this beer we're sipping. We'll fast forward through the story. He got a 25-gallon aluminum pot from Costco to put on his turkey fryer.
Yeah, that's a big pot.
And so this is, he says, the inaugural brew in that pot combined my brewing fantasies of a double batch with that of a group brew day. My fellow brewer and I successfully collected a pre-boil volume that none could claim was a drop less than 18 gallons. Indeed, I felt like a lord among homebrewers when that awe-inspiring volume reached a rolling boil under the power of that turkey fryer burner. I was in my glory as I turned away from the pot to check my hop schedule in my basic brewing logbook.
There you
go. Product placement.
Yep.
I tell you now that I sensed something in that moment, much the way dogs know to lie down before an earthquake, or perhaps more akin to a disturbance in the force. I might have ignored that premonition, but for my brewing companion, who, having just returned from an errand, shouted my name with great urgency. Instinctively and with the reflexes of a 300-pound cat, he's lost some weight since then, I leapt onto the lifetime folding table before me. I found safety just as a tsunami of hot wort rushed under the table, narrowly missing the discount bin Crocs on my feet.
Oh, my God.
I took a moment to process the scene. Much like a turkey that had been unjustly eaten by the Bumpus hounds, the wort was gone, all gone. I slid from the table and tiptoed through the standing steaming solution and extinguished the flame of the turkey burner. My co-brewer, wearing more responsible footwear, retrieved the brew pot from its angled resting position. It was then that I comprehended what had happened. The burner stand stood twisted and gnarled, having succumbed to the conspiring factors of excessive weight and heat.
Wow.
I've done that as well.
Yeah, me too.
You've succumbed to the conspiring factors of excessive weight and heat.
It's usually at the beach.
When the burner cooled enough to handle, it was permanently malformed and now useful only as a piece of modern art, a testament to my brewing vanity. So Doug is a good brewer, as
yes, he is.
As we are is the testament of this beer.
Is your lack of being able to speak. What have we learned here? 18 gallons weighs a bunch.
Yes, and certain equipment has certain limits.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from Nick in Denver, Colorado.
Hey, Nick.
It started as most of my brew days this past year have been, with the burners of my 10-gallon automated brewing system firing at sunrise shortly after my 10-month-old son wakes up on a Sunday morning. I was making a 10-gallon all-grain cream ale to test out my newly fabricated and installed mash tun tippy dump. I liked her and the birds.
She was good. A little messy.
Tippy dump. If you're not familiar with a mash tun tippy dump, it basically allows me to tip my mash tun out and away from the brewery frame and dump the spent grains into a bucket for disposal. In order to complete the process, I need to detach a quick disconnect fitting and drain the excess wort in the hose into a bucket as well. During my boil of the 10-gallon batch, I began to clean up the mash tun and try out my new installation. After draining my mash tun into my boil kettle, I disconnected and began draining the hose into a bucket. After the hose had completed draining, I left the hose to dangle in the air, at which point my son had awoken from his first nap, crying. I ran upstairs to get him out of bed, changed his diaper, and returned downstairs to check on my batch. I rounded the corner with my son in my arms to find a 6-foot-wide steaming puddle of wort on the floor of my basement. I quickly ran over to pick up the hose, pinch it shut, and attempted to flip a switch 2 feet away with the arm that I was holding my son with. At this point, he begins to cry, bloody murder, in my ear. After struggling for a very long, several seconds, I'm finally able to reach the switch and close the valve that is dumping the boiling gold back through my brewing system and onto the floor.
Oh, my goodness.
Now came the cleanup. Unfortunately, my wife was away, and my brother would take 45 minutes to arrive and help me watch my son while I cleaned, so I quickly grabbed our hiking backpack baby carrier and tossed my son in. Then I grabbed our Dust Devil carpet cleaner and went to town, sucking up a total of 5 gallons of hot wort off the floor before it spread to the carpet.
Oh,
So,
it's no good. You know, if you pick up Bono and he'll scream Sunday Bloody Sunday in your ear while you're trying to...
no, Bono would scream, I got you, babe.
Well, yeah.
Bono.
So, I don't pronounce Irish names very well.
Stephen writes in, What is to follow is not only the story of a homebrewing disaster, but a tragedy in the spirit of the bard, William Shakespeare.
Ooh.
While I've been brewing on and on, it's not in rhyming couplets. While I've been in iambic pentameter. While I've been brewing on and off for the better part of 10 years and sharing my beer with friends and family almost as long, I'd never made a beer my father would do more than politely sip. This was no small obstacle to overcome, as he spent a long career that placed him in Germany, Belgium, and the UK, sampling the best beers those areas had to offer. I had made up my mind that instead of brewing the APA, IPA, and stouts that had become the mainstays of my brew day, that I would brew a Hefeweizen, specially to impress my father. A trip to my local homebrew stores where I overlooked my first clue to the impending disaster. While a Hefe's grist is simple, I'd never brewed with its star ingredient, wheat, before, didn't notice the large amount of grain that was not properly crushed. After researching mash schedules, I decided on a 4-rest step mash, which was also a first. I brew with a straightforward brew-in-a-bag setup that includes a, in parentheses, legally purchased kegel, propane burner, and mesh bag. So with zeal and diligence, I stepped through my rests by turning on and off the gas and obsessively checking temperature out of one eye and watching the clock from the other. When it came time to hoist the grain bag out, I was shocked to lift the mesh bag right out with no resistance at all. Or grain. The melted, ragged ends of the mesh told the rest of the story. And I raced inside to grab the smaller mesh I had and a spare fermenting bucket. Heaving with great difficulty the kegel onto my work table. Wow.
Yeah.
He was able to lift the kegel and a full kegel onto the work table, while simultaneously avoiding being scorched by the heated stainless, provides the comedic relief to our unfolding tragedy. With the mash emptied into the bucket and strained with a spare bag, I rushed to rinse the kegel and scrape as much of the melted bag as possible. Sore from scrubbing, I returned the stainless beast to its propane base. As I splashed the sweet wort back into the kegel, panicked warnings of hot side aeration had to be calmed by remembering that most research indicates it's not a problem on a homebrew scale. Probably. Once boiling was complete and the wort chilled, I took a gravity reading. 1030. 1.030. Great.
That's a big beer.
Well, no, it's a small beer.
Well, hear my facetiousness.
Oh.
Hear my Shakespearean irony.
Okay. Okay, Alanis. What this calls for is quick thinking and lots of brown sugar, which I didn't have. Rushing out the door after transferring to a clean fermentation bucket, I hastily informed my wife why I must run to the store to buy large quantities of sugar. A gallon of water and the newly purchased sugar later, my beer was finally sitting at a respectable 1044. When complete, I kegged, carved, and crossed my fingers that the result would at least be drinkable, with all my hopes of impressing my father dashed. Now for the tragedy. This beer, the beer with the nearly impossible to replicate brew day, including destruction of equipment, this is the beer that lit up my father's eyes as I poured and brought a smile to his face after his first sip. This is the beer he calls my mother over to take the next sip, while proudly proclaiming it is his favorite. This beer. I suppose not all was lost on this homebrew disaster, for I now know to double crush wheat, sink a colander below my bag to keep it off the bottom if you're going to heat, and that hot side aeration is probably not a problem. But for some reason, no other Hefe since has tasted as good as the first time I shared this one with my father.
Well, you got all those PCBs from the bag in there. That's the secret ingredient.
A little nylon.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to, if you're, you can do a step mash by heating the mash tun with brew in a bag, but you got to take care of your bottom. Take care of your bag bottom there.
That's what she said.
Drew says, just as I'm sure this is the case with other disaster stories, it started as any other brew day. I was planning on brewing my first Doppelbock, a double mint Doppelbock to be exact, on my all-grain brew-in-a-bag system. But little did I know what my grain bill had planned for me. See, I was used to brewing ales with roughly 10 to 12 pounds to mash in and sparge out, but this time I was taking on a full 5 to 7 pounds more. And as Robert Frost once aptly put it, that made all the difference. We have a very literary crowd.
Very literary, yes.
My mash-in started fine, great preliminary rest, and I was killing my temperatures. I'm finally getting a hang of this mash tun thing, I thought, as I congratulated myself prematurely. And while I had, I certainly wasn't prepared for the attempting to drain the excess wort off my grain when the time came for the boil. Now, I'm no slouch. I'm in my late 20s, lift weights frequently, and at the time of this brew, I was training for a marathon, one which I completed a few weeks later in under 4 hours, mind you. Whoa.
Well, there you go.
I can do that in a car. But over 26 miles in a car. But after over an hour in hot liquid, that grain did not stay 15 to 17 pounds. Oh, no, it became a whole new beast of great weight, water weight to be exact, one worthy of men named Magnus, Arnold, and Thor. I bet he was Thor the next day.
Don't brag about it, I'm Thor myself.
And
honey, I'm Thor.
You'd be Thor too.
That's right.
Nonetheless, I was unfazed with a mighty tug and
That's why it's Thor.
with a mighty tug and a far mightier grunt, I lifted the bag above the pot to start to let my sweet, and I mean graham cracker sweet wort, start to drain from the bag. 5 minutes went by, 10 minutes, 15, and while my forearms budged, my manual sparge system held firm. Well, for a few more minutes, anyway. At about the 18-minute mark, I knew the grip I had was untenable. Wow, 18 minutes. That's impressive.
Yeah.
I also knew I was on my own. With the delicacy that I thought rivaled a ballerina, I slowly but surely attempted to hang my bag on the upper cabinet above my stove. Well, who hasn't?
He needs one of these growler haulers. That's what I'm telling you.
You can hang your bag on the upper cabinet.
That's right.
With ease.
That's right.
And with the delicacy that actually rivaled a stone, my bag slipped from my fingers and fell immediately back into my pot filled with 150-degree wort. Seeing as brewers are scientists, you can figure what physics did the rest. Hot wort flew everywhere, including into my face and chest.
Ooh.
I immediately pulled off my now scalding T-shirt by default, but as to the rest of my body, my brewer's instinct proved to be stronger than my survival instinct. Nary a care about my face, chest, or the burns that were likely to arise on both. I immediately went to salvage the remaining wort and sparge the remaining grain. Well, there you go. Save the beer first.
Yep.
And to my surprise, I was able to hit the 5.5 gallons of wort necessary for my boil, even after the spill. Only after 20 minutes of ensuring my beer was saved did it dawn on me that I should find a mirror and check to see if I had second-degree burns.
Yeah.
Luckily, though there was some very apparent redness and swelling... Well, if that lasts more than 4 hours, call a doctor.
That's right.
Nothing lasted more than a day. Well, that's good. Moreover, my Doppelbock is carbonating in the keg as I write this, having survived a full fermentation despite my mishaps.
That's quite a story.
That is quite a story.
There's probably not another disaster story like that anywhere.
Well, we'll see. Jim from Herndon, Virginia. I had a couple of bottles of homebrew explode. Not mine, some Graf from a buddy, shooting shrapnel out that stuck into the walls, hitting me in the back as well.
gravy.
I turned to see what had happened and sliced my foot open in a large piece of glass. Ended up with carpet soaked in homebrew and very stained with blood. I ended up okay, but the carpet was a lost cause. Thankfully, it was my man cave in the basement, so I simply just ripped the carpet out, planning to put tile in. Here's to what I hope is an uneventful 2016.
Yeah,
indeed. Tile's better for brewing anyway.
Yep.
Bob is from Riverside, California. Says he met us at the Homebrew Conference in San Diego. There you go. Good to hear from you, Bob. I was brewing at night due to upcoming competitions and the need to refill my pipeline. Everything with my brew evening went as planned, hitting my mash temps perfectly. My starting gravity and my final volume all were spot on. I had a couple of small spills during my transfer to my fermenter that I figured I would take care of during my cleanup.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. After scrubbing down my brew kettle, I rinsed it out and realized I still needed hot water to clean my mash tun. I filled the kettle and lit the fire to heat it up. I proceeded to finish all my cleaning, got the mash tun cleaned and rinsed. Remembering the spilled wort on the decking, I thought, hey, I already have hot water that I can use in the kettle. But I forgot to turn off the flame, so the water was pretty close to boiling. I opened the valve and started hosing off the patio with the hot water. As the water level dropped to the point where I could lift the kettle, I grabbed it and started directing the flow of hot water where I needed it to go. My wife came home from work at that point. She made a comment that I couldn't hear, so being the attentive husband that I am, I turned my shoulders to better orient my head to hear her repeat her comment. She said, "It's a good thing the neighbors can't see you because from behind it doesn't look like you're holding a kettle."
Yeah, well, who hasn't been there?
Fill in the visual of me standing holding a kettle smaller than my girth with a stream of water flowing freely. At this point, my brain let me know that near boiling water was streaming onto my lower leg and foot. Fortunately, I was wearing thick socks and shoes. Nearly dropping the kettle back on the burner, I proceeded to rip the scalding hot shoe and sock from my foot when my brain signaled that my opposite hand was getting too hot. Leaning to remove my foot coverings, I had placed my hand on the bare metal of my still hot kettle. After a lot of strong language, reminding myself of the lack of intelligence and a lot of dancing around like a drunk monkey in a mosh pit, I was able to get my cleanup finished. I thought about calling the IPA Burning Dance, but decided that would need too much explanation. In the long run, it was a very nice IPA that earned third-place ribbon in the competition. My wife only talks to me after I come back into the house now.
There you go.
I like the stories that have a good ending, with the dad liking the beer, or winning a competition, or
no fatalities.
No fatalities. Always good.
Yeah.
Lloyd writes in, fast submission for a brewing disaster. I have 2 kids and brew Sunday mornings and bottle Friday nights after the kids go to bed. I use a bottling bucket on top of a chair, which is on top of the kitchen table. Let me repeat that.
This has a problem. Just with my limited architectural skills, I can tell you.
I use a bottling bucket on top of a chair, which is on top of the kitchen table. After washing and sanitizing about 50 bottles and filling up about 40, I had to stop to cap some bottles. Just to make sure I got the last bit of beer at the bottom of the bottling bucket, I rolled a towel up and put it under one side of the bucket so I can get those last couple of bottles of beer out of the bucket. It's about 1 a.m. and everyone's asleep and I'm tired and want to be finished, and I was rushing. I sat down, grabbed a bottle to finish the last maybe 6 to 7 bottles, and when I went to fill the bottle, I was hit in the head by the bucket and showered with 6 to 7 bottles of beer.
Oh.
What a mess.
Yeah.
Drenched in beer all over the floor, the walls, and even a little on the ceiling. Up to 2:30, cleaning up the mess. Yeah. At least I didn't wake anyone with my cursing. In the morning, my wife walks into the kitchen and says, "That smells like really good beer."
At New Belgium, the fooders, they get these giant towels
when they're bottled, to get the last drop.
Just get the last few cases out.
Just to tip up.
Yeah.
Well, they have a tippy dumper. Jeff writes in, I'm a new brewer about 5 months in and have been brewing all grain for the last 7 batches. I brew and bottle every 2 weeks, so I'm always looking to improve. He says something nice. Your podcast and video series have been a great help.
Well,
awesome.
Good.
On a side note, I already have a horror story. Turkey fryer leg gave out with only 10 minutes left on my boil. This was my first all-grain batch and a really nice stout. Brewing just inside my garage door, it luckily fell outwards onto the driveway. I thought it would be funny to outline the spill with chalk to, preserve the crime scene. Well, let's just say the chalk has long been gone, but a stain remains. I'm sure it won't take much effort to remove the stain, but as a daily reminder to finish my brew stand, it's not always a good idea to have lightning-fast reactions. Remember, let a boiling pot fall. It's good advice.
Yeah.
Trying to save it from falling is never a good idea. Realized my mistake of fighting gravity just as I grabbed the kettle and let it go. Didn't get burned too bad. I brewed the stout a couple of weeks later, and it turned out great. I'm calling it Falling Darkness Stout. Also, my wife now calls my brewing setup the Distillery.
The Distillery. That's good.
You get extra points for naming the beer. This is Peter. I've been meaning to write you about my brewing disasters, so here you go. The batch from Hellas.
Well, okay.
At that time, I'd been using glass carboys for 20 years and only broke one when my black lab wagged its tail in the kitchen and sent an empty carboy down the cellar stairs. Oh, my. Fast forward several years to the Hellas from Hell. In the same week, my son moved a ladder in the garage and smashed a carboy on brew day. I was cleaning another carboy. Without the sponsor's carboy carrier holder, wink, wink, it slipped out of my wet hands and smashed on the sink. Shards of glass went down to my bare feet and sliced open my shin and foot. Ouch.
Man.
Cleaned up the mess, applied first aid to my brewing wound, and brewed injury-free for the rest of the day. Third carboy broken in 20 years, but second in 1 week. Fast forward. Have you ever broken a carboy?
One that was it was a mirror. I did it, and I have 7 years of bad luck. Yes, I have, actually. I've broken one carboy.
You had one freeze outside, didn't you?
Yeah. I didn't actually break it, but nature did.
Negligence.
Yeah.
Fast forward several weeks later, the Hellas from Hell gets fermented, carbonated, and prepared with 15 other cornies for a college grad party for my son. Wow, this is a dad.
Yeah.
The party is an hour away, so on Friday, my son and I head out on the highway with 15 cornies and 2 jockey boxes in the SUV.
Sounds like an 80s movie.
and two kegerators in the open trailer being towed. We're driving in typical stop-and-go traffic on a Friday night commuter hour. Luckily, we're not traveling at highway speeds. I asked my son if he disconnected and secured the 2 CO2 tanks. I'm foreshadowing here, he says. He's listened to the show before. He affirms that not only did he disconnect them, he turned them off, but he also secured each one with the regulators in their own padded Home Depot bucket. A while later, we hear this ominous loud hissing coming from the third seat of the SUV. Simultaneously, I look up at the rearview mirror and see a tornado funnel cloud rising and emerging from the back to the front of the car. I immediately hit the brakes. I hit the power windows to open all of the windows. I can no longer see anything in the car. It's completely covered in white smoke. I swerved the car to the left as I no longer see the distance of the car in front of me, and I can't see the car behind me. I can see the guardrail to my left. As I slow down, I try to get as close to it without slamming into it. Meanwhile, my son has climbed into the third seat. All I can see is his 2 feet near my face, and I think to myself, it looks like the wicked witch of the East from Wizard of Oz. He's saying he can't find the tank, and he finds it and claims that it's already turned off. I'm thinking he's lying and covering up the fact that he never disconnected it from the corny, nor that he closed the valve. My theory is that the hose broke away from the regulator, sending 5 pounds of CO2 into the air. Eventually, the tank empties. My son climbs back to the front seat, and smoke starts to billow from the car. We can now see concerned citizens wondering what kind of Breaking Bad episode is being taped in front of them as they look into the car as they drive by with both bewilderment and disdain. We realized what had happened, CO2 leak, and we were alive. Now we started to laugh, but we were both high as a kite as the tank purged all the oxygen from the car.
Yeah, no kidding.
My son was more lightheaded than me as he was ingesting more at the source, and he was exerting himself more than I. We counted our blessings and drove for 45 minutes to a fire extinguisher repair shop and told him what had happened. He examined the tank and said that the relief disc, I got cut off there. Anyway, PSA, from what we now understand, if you leave a CO2 tank in a hot car, it will damage or cause the little disc to fail and release the gas.
Well,
so there's some safety.
Yeah.
This is not just entertainment, it's safety. Did you know the last time that I went to this place in Fayetteville, which is like 30 minutes away from my house, to get new CO2 tanks for my kegerator, and they wouldn't sell them to me unless I had a truck or a trailer, so I could put the tank outside the car.
You've told me that. Yes, and now we know why.
Yeah,
Wow.
they were very lucky.
Yeah, they were.
Because it not only filled the car with CO2, it obscured the vision as well. So carry your CO2 outside the car.
Yep.
Andrew from Johannesburg, South Africa. We've got a couple stories from South Africa. Andrew says, to add to your collection of brewing disasters, I've recently brewed an ale after watching the weather, and I decided that the temperatures had dropped down to a range that would support the fermentation and also make it easier to cool the wort. It gets into the high 30 degrees Celsius here in South Africa during the summer, which is, what is that? Oh, well, it's
damn hot.
100 degrees.
Yep.
Whoa! I nearly fell down. This is good beer, Doug. Ironically, the day I brewed, the temperature spiked into the 30s, and I was running around the house with a heavy 20-liter or 5-gallon fermenter, trying to find the coolest spot to keep it while I redo the ice bath to drop the temperature even more. I was eventually remembering my pool's temp was roughly 24 to 26 degrees, so I rushed out to put my fermenter in the pool to get it cooled down. In my haste, I wasn't watching what I was doing or where I was going, and I ended up falling down the small set of stairs off our patio, bouncing on my fermenter, thankfully it's stainless steel, and taking it with me as I ended up in the pool. Needless to say, I lost the beer and have been doing a lot of cleaning on the fermenter after taking it to a friend who has a steel business to get it reshaped to make sure none of the pool chemicals will affect my next batch.
Why didn't he just do a really extra long boil on the water in the pool? You could have boiled that for, say, 10, 12 days. Get down to 5 gallons.
There might be a little chlorine in there, or salt.
It'll boil off. Now, the
salt won't. If it's a saline pool.
But salty beers are a trend now. You can buy salty.
That's right. You can make a high gravity. I'm not gonna remember what the salt beer is called. People are shouting at their thingies now.
All I know is when I was a kid, my dad would put salt in his beer, and I thought that was pretty weird. And now you can buy this upscale, stuff that costs way more than it should because somebody put some salt in their beer.
I'll think of the salt beer later.
Yeah, I don't know what the name of it is. What do you got?
It's okay, this is Eric. You'll like this. It's got barbecue.
Well, of course I'll like it.
Over the 4th of July weekend, I decided to multitask by grilling a beef brisket while I brewed a batch of beer. You've done that, I'm sure.
You don't grill a beef brisket. You slowly I turned step by step. You can't grill a brisket. Anyway, go ahead.
The beer was a honey... Sorry, Eric. The beer was a honey rye that I planned on aging in a bourbon barrel for a bit. Seeing as how I had a lot to do that day, I got it started in the garage nice and early. The combination brew/grill day was going great. I hit my pre-boil gravity and then some. I didn't mind. I'll always take a few more points in efficiency. After all, efficiency is the name of the game when multitasking. For my brisket, I decided to put some wood chips in a small smoker box that sits atop the charcoal to get some smoky flavor. I'll usually switch out the chips a few different times during the long grilling session, not unlike adding hops to a boil. Since I already had my thick leather gloves on from moving my hot brew pot, I decided now would be a great time to add some more wood chips. I took the grate off the grill and grabbed the smoker box with my gloved hands. I removed the top of the box and tossed the spent wood chips into the curbside garage container sitting next to the garage. or garbage container sitting next to the garage. I loaded the box with more chips, put the grate back on, and the brisket was back on its way. A little later, while watching my wort boil, a neighborhood lady out for a walk came up to my garage and informed me that my garbage container was on fire.
I saw this coming.
The wood chips, I thought. I immediately sprang into action and grabbed my garden hose. Smoke was billowing out of the garbage container. I gave the garbage a thorough soaking with the hose and thanked the nice neighbor lady. I went back to the garage and contemplated my stupidity while I watched the wort boil. Another 10 minutes went by, and I was getting ready for a hop edition when my next-door neighbor came over and told me that my garbage was on fire. "No, it's not," I said. "It was on fire. I just hosed it off 10 minutes ago." That's when I saw the billowing smoke through the garage window. The garbage must have flared up. Just the night before, I had cleaned up my workshop, creating a perfect fertile environment full of sawdust, scrap wood, and old newspapers used for spray painting inside my garbage container. I tossed my... Now this... See,
I would have thrown a rack of ribs on there.
That's a perfect...
Choked it down, choked the fire down to 250, and just let it go.
Now here's the line between an avid home brewer and just a casual home brewer. His garbage thing's on fire next to his garage. I tossed my hops into the boil.
That's right.
Priorities.
Because you don't want to miss that hop
It's
edition.
all about priorities.
That's right.
I tossed my hops into the boil and then ran around to the side of the garage again with my garden hose in hand again. The garbage container was no longer smoldering. This time it had flames rolling out of the top mere feet away from my garage eaves. This time I made sure to soak the garbage until it was out, and then I soaked it some more. It was a nice calm day that day, so the smoke didn't dissipate. My backyard was full of thick, tan, yellowish-colored smoke, the kind that can only come from breaking down those long-chain hydrocarbons known as plastic that work oh so well for making garbage containers. I was back in the garage when my wife popped her head out the door and said, "It's really smoky in the backyard." I would have said, "Yes, dear." I decided it was best to come clean and nonchalantly said, "That's because I set the garbage container on fire."
Yeah.
She took it really well and just chuckled. The rest of the brew day went off without a hitch. So, everything ended up turning out all right that day. The brisket was excellent, and the beer was pretty good, too. So there you go.
I love that story.
So the garage is on fire. First, I tossed the hops in.
Yeah.
Wrote it down in the book. David says, I had an accident the likes of which I've never heard of before. A friend told me that he had great results wet milling his grain by adding a small amount of water to the grain just before milling. So I decided to try it out. I use a barley crusher mill with a 7-pound hopper mounted to the wall about head height. Foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Attached to a power drill. It was working great until wet flour from the ground grain started to stick to the rollers and bog down the drill. The drill strained and started to slow until pop! The mill broke free from its mounts.
Oh.
Suddenly unleashed, the drill spun the mill around at 1,500 RPM, spraying 7 pounds of grain all over my garage until it finally unplugged itself. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. I picked the mill off the ground and for some reason decided to plug the cord back in. Pop!
Okay.
I get smacked in the face by the mill. During the chaos, the drill had gotten locked in the on position, and when I plugged it back in, I am smacked right in the face. So now I'm bleeding from the mouth. My mill is in pieces. My grain is spread over a 300-square-foot area that is not food safe. And did I mention that I had already started heating the strike water? In the end, though, everything came together. I reattached the mill, sturdily this time, though the mill now has a major wobble. So does he after getting smacked in the head. Weighed and ground new grain and eventually produced a delicious Imperial IPA and managed to clean up all the grain before my wife came home. Well, almost all. 3 months later, we went for a hike, and when she went to put on her boots, she found them half full of barley.
But if it had sprouted, you could do something with that.
Yeah, that's right. That's boot malting.
Boot malting. Don't tell Vinny Chilurzo.
There's floor malting and then there's boot malting.
We have boot malting.
Boot malting. Tom from Seattle, Washington says, a few weeks back, my wife and I took advantage of a beautiful Seattle weekend and brewed a hearty stout to enjoy during the upcoming fall and winter. You couldn't have asked for a better brew day to brew outside. The sun was out, the sky was clear, and the birds were chirping. After several hours of mashing, boiling, and hopping, we plopped the immersion chiller into the wort and waited anxiously for the stout to cool. When we got to our pitching temp, I ran inside the house to grab the sterilized yeast packet and sterilized scissors so I could pitch my yeast and call it a day. When I came back outside, however, I was in for a shocking surprise. A bird with impeccable aim had flown overhead and deposited his leftovers in the brew pot.
Yeah.
I frantically tried to remove the unwelcome guest from the wort, splashing frantically with my brew spoon. The symphony of expletives...
You just can't fix that. I'm sorry.
You can't fix poop?
You can't fix that.
The symphony of expletives that came out of my mouth were muddled only by the volume of my wife's howling laughter. Emotionally battered, I stubbornly pitched the yeast, racked the wort into a carboy, and fixed an airlock. It's been 1 month since the incident, and now it's time to make a decision. I've not tasted the beer since that day. I honestly don't know if the late addition will cause me to be sick if I drink
brewed
the beer. Yeah, he would have had disease, of course.
He's got PTSD, post-traumatic stress dump. I don't know.
Is it possible to get sick from a batch of beer that's been infected in this unique way?
Yes.
Well,
no, it's not, because it's been boiled.
Well, it's been boiled, but then the poop came after the chilling. Well,
I missed that.
Yeah, well, I sent this to toxicologist Paul, and he said it won't hurt. He said it'd be fine.
Yeah, it won't hurt you.
Just don't tell anybody you're giving it to.
Yeah, that's worse than like real oyster beer or mushroom beer or something, you know.
What are the prairie oyster beer? Greg writes in, since September, I've been stocking up on my supply of high-gravity beers. In anticipation of the winter holidays, I've made one big beer per month for September, October, and November.
I'm going to come out and live with this guy.
I've made 2 barley wines, and my most recent was a Scotch ale. Each of these big beers was fermented with Y yeast, 1728 Scottish ale yeast. Man, is this stuff ever a workhorse. The ambient temperature where I ferment in my basement is admittedly rather high, but it's never caused me much of an issue. That is, until I began the barley wines. September's brew day went off without a hitch, which is good because I was going out in the evening for an all-night fishing trip with my brother. When I arrived home the following morning, my basement was covered with about a gallon of wort from the overflow there. What is it? You fix a hose, a
blowout tube.
Blow off. Yes, thank you.
Blow out, blow off.
He says, okay, lesson learned, move on. October's big beer brew day went off without a hitch. I must be getting better at this, I thought. Even learned from my disaster a month earlier and installed a blow-off tube, into a jar of sanitized water. All was well. Until I woke the next morning to find the jar had overflown, and I had a gallon of wort on my basement floor. That's a recurring theme.
Yep.
All right, fool me once, fool me twice, but I'm no dummy. So when November's brew day came along, I was taking no chances. The brew day went off without a hitch. In order to make sure I didn't end up with wort on my floor, I split the batch between my glass carboy and a plastic fermenting bucket. I'm a genius. I left the 2 batches to ferment past the point of high kreuzen and very smugly, with an air of I showed you, combined the 2 batches back together in the glass carboy. This is perfect, I thought. I didn't have to sacrifice beer volume for headspace, and I cunningly avoided the hassle of a blown fermenter. With my heart full and my head high, I went to bed for the night. I knew I had nothing to worry about. The next morning, as I typically do, I checked on the beer in the basement, sniffed the airlock, admiring the swirling yeast all over the floor, which I had just stepped in. 1 gallon unfermented wort on the floor. I guess it's true what they say. Some people have to learn the hard way. So,
well, third time's a charm. Got to lay off those Camels.
That's right. I'm switching to menthols.
Yeah.
Curtis, again from South Africa. We have another South African. I started brewing in April this year and experienced my biggest brewing disaster so far with my third brew, a dry Irish stout. On bottling day, everyone's favorite, I had my full bottling bucket sitting on the kitchen counter, leading with one edge on a cutting board to keep the spout low enough so it wouldn't suck air as I got to the bottom of the bucket. Then, with my back turned, collecting all the sanitized bottles, I heard a sliding sound and quickly turned, only to see my bucket sliding off the counter, followed by an impressive fountain of stout reaching every corner of the kitchen.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I brew small batches. Another reason to brew small batches. Thankfully, I brew small batches, about 1.25 gallons, but was still finding spots of dried, sticky stout in corners of cupboards and drawers weeks later. I managed to bottle 3 bottles that didn't escape the bucket, but needless to say, oxidation had ruined them completely. I've since made sure that I've always had an extra hand when bottling and no precarious leaning buckets. There you go. Thank you, Curtis.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Geez. Yeah.
Beware the sliding buckets.
Sliding bucket, the leaning bucket of Pisa. It's never good.
Now, this one is a bit technical. This is for those who are more technical. This is from Stephen in Pittsburgh. One of the biggest impact changes I made to my brewing setup was to add temperature control. Like so many other home brewers, I purchased an STC 1000 unit off eBay.
Who hasn't? Duh.
My winter setup consists of a space heater in a small closet, and my summer setup consists of a mini fridge that fits a carboy. I continued using this setup throughout the cold winter months without a hitch, and then switched over to my summer setup when things warmed up. Fast forward to the next winter, I brewed up a batch of beer on a Sunday and sent it to my heated closet. I decided I wanted a little more juice out of the space heater and turned the heat setting up a bit. The following day, I returned to a smell I've been familiar with since I was very young, and I fried the family computer, burned electronics. My nose quickly led me to the STC unit, which was a bit blacker than when I'd last seen it. The year before, I calibrated the setting on the space heater using a multimeter to ensure that it drew fewer than 10 amps, which is the rating of the relay in the STC 1000. In the years since, I'd completely forgotten about this. The relay was fried. The worst part is that the relay shorted open, which meant my space heater was blasting the carboy all day. The temperature sensor was reading a nice balmy 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And this was the first 24 hours of fermentation, when temperature is incredibly important.
So it's like brewing in Alabama.
That's right. Or here in the summertime.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, I don't remember how that beer came out. There is a silver lining, though. It didn't burn my apartment down. No kidding. Let this be a cautionary tale. Put a fuse in any homemade temperature controller. This could have all been avoided if I had thrown in a 10-amp fuse. So there you go. Good advice.
Another
from
important
Stephen of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yes, right.
Safety tip.
Yes. The stack is getting smaller here.
Still pretty thick.
Joe says, my young daughter likes to help on brew day. She likes to do things like stir the mash or kettle and check the temperature. On this particular brew day, I had first runnings boiling in one pot and second runnings boiling in a second pot. At the time of the story, I would boil the runnings separately because I didn't have a large enough pot, and I would combine them in one 12-gallon fermenter. I left the kettles for a moment to use the bathroom and returned to find my daughter stirring the kettle. It's not something that I like her doing without my supervision. Good advice.
Mm-hmm.
When I took the spoon from her and put it down, I realized my thermometer was missing. She had decided to check the temperature as well and had dropped it in the kettle. The glass thermometer had broken in the kettle and ruined the entire batch. On the bright side, it was the second runnings kettle, so I decided to use all of the remaining hops for what was to be a 10-gallon batch of pale ale and threw them all in with the first runnings to make a double IPA.
Yeah.
My wife and I named it Mercury Rising IPA. Should be Mercury Falling. Fell right into the
something like
kettle.
that. Yeah.
Okay, Dana from Fairport, New York, says one of the keys to making a fine lager is to pitch lots of yeast. For this beer, I pitched the beer onto the yeast cake from a previous lager, my Rocktoberfest Stein beer, to ensure there was lots of yeast. Another key to making a fine lager is temperature control, so if you wish to reproduce this award-winning recipe, you must follow the steps following exactly. Number 1, After using my wort chiller to reduce the wort temperature to my water temp, I poured the beer onto the above-mentioned yeast cake, then placed the carboy into my converted freezer/beer fridge/lagering chamber with the temperature controller set to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Number 2. I checked the next day and the lager showed some signs of activity, but not too much. Perhaps I should have chilled the wort further using ice to avoid crashing the yeast by chilling it too fast after pitching. Number 3. I checked the next day. Crap! My massive activity had started, and the carboy had overflowed through the airlock, creating a mess in my lagering fridge. I guess the yeast wasn't dormant after all. I took the carboy out, cleaned it off, cleaned out the bottom of the lagering chamber, and then replaced the carboy. Number 4. 2 days later, I checked again. Double crap. It seems I forgot to replace the temperature controller probe after cleaning up the lagering chamber, so it was basically reverted to being a freezer set on maximum.
Oh, boy.
My beer appeared frozen solid. At least I was using a plastic better bottle instead of a glass carboy. I took the frozen beer out of the freezer and let it thaw for a couple of days. Number 5. After melting, the yeast seems to have survived as activity continued. I put the carboy back into the lagering chamber, this time with the temperature controller probe. Number 6. A couple weeks later, I racked the beer into a Cornelius keg, which I placed in my garage to precision lager at garage temperature. Number 7. A couple of days later, crap again. The lid of the keg is hanging loose, exposing my beer to the open air. I suspect my son, who can't keep his hands off anything, has been playing with my keg lid. I seal the keg up and purge the airspace with CO2. This time I pressurize the keg so the lid won't fall open if played with. Number 8. A couple weeks later, I carbonate the beer with more CO2 pressure and fill a couple of 2-liter bottles for the Brewer of the Month Dark Lager Night. And that's how you make an award-winning lager. Remember to follow the above steps exactly. That's a lesson. You don't give up on a beer until it's until it's done.
Yep.
Okay, this comes from Coleman. Coleman, I'm going to shorten the story a little bit. He and his buddies had brewed like 2 or 3 beers that had come out sour, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So they decided to brew a porter recipe, 10-gallon batches of porter. So he says, we document every step for this beer. We split the 10 gallons into brand-new primary fermenters. We use our brand-new siphon to move those 2 batches into meticulously cleaned and sanitized secondary fermenters. We sample the beer at every stage and find no issues with it. Not sour.
Nothing sour.
Bottling day comes yesterday, and we're both optimistic that we have eliminated any issues. We sample it before siphoning it into our bottling bucket and priming sugar mixture. No issues at all. We proceed to fill 130 bottles of non-sour porter. Just to be safe, we sample the last half bottle that isn't going to get capped. It's sour. Brutally sour.
Not just sour.
Brutally sour. It says, my buddy and I are dumbfounded at this point. I would like to think that we are both fairly intelligent people, but we just can't figure out what went wrong here. We've checked everything. As I sit there wondering how much I was able to get from selling all this homebrewing equipment, I noticed the bag of priming sugar. It's the only thing we haven't checked. I taste a small sample of it and find that it carries the overwhelming taste of Sour Patch Kids or Sour Skittles, or the crushing reality that our process was not the issue and that we have been sold a 3-pound bag of citric acid instead of priming sugar.
Well,
I find this situation equal parts infuriating and hilarious. Always taste test your ingredients, I guess. So there you go, Coleman. The beer is perfect until priming, and then... Okay. Mike from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. About a year ago, I bought a conical fermenter. One feature of this particular conical fermenter is a detachable collection ball that attaches to the lowest point of the fermenter, and gravity allows the yeast and settlement to slide down the sides of the cone and collect in the ball at the bottom. A valve can be closed and the ball can be disconnected to harvest the yeast for future batches. The first time I used my new conical fermenter, I filled it, pitched the yeast, and let it go for primary fermentation. A week or so later, on Sunday morning, I noticed that the collection ball was almost filled with sediment, so I closed the valve and removed it. I need to add that the collection ball holds about 24 ounces and came with a very nice, tight-fitting rubber stopper. After I removed the collection ball, I put the stopper in the neck of the ball and put it on my kitchen counter so I could harvest the yeast later that day. Late Sunday evening, I saw the collection ball sitting by the kitchen sink and decided that I was tired, and because I was tired, I really didn't want to harvest the yeast. I picked up the collection ball and over the kitchen sink and pulled out the stopper to empty it into the drain. As I was pulling out the stopper, the liquid exploded out of the collection ball. At first, I thought that it just hit my shirt. But after the initial shock wore off, there was yeast and foam on the underside of my kitchen cabinets, my counters, the backsplash, the ceiling, over the half wall, into my dining room, the wall on the other side of the dining room, and very evenly dispersed across the carpet everywhere between.
Wow.
At 10 o'clock on Sunday night, as I was cleaning the walls, cabinets, and carpets, I couldn't find any humor in the situation. But even later that night, I found it pretty funny. My carpet cleaners were very accommodating and also very amused when I explained why I needed an emergency carpet cleaning the next day.
See, here's the thing. Now you've got a house yeast.
Literally.
Everything can be open fermentation from now on.
You have a yeast house.
That's right. You just get some spiders and some cobwebs and move to Belgium, and you're good.
You don't have a house yeast, you have a yeast house. Jesse from, how would you pronounce it? Acushnet, Massachusetts?
I'll go with that.
A while back when I was pretty new to home brewing, my wife and I decided to try our hand at making a Russian Imperial Stout. We had a few batches under our belt at that point. We were feeling pretty confident. What's the saying? Pride comes before the fall?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, we were still brewing indoors. Bad news in a brewing disaster story. And we had decided to brew in my parents' kitchen.
Oh, bad.
Doubly bad news.
Bad.
We were brewing a 5.5-gallon batch in a 5-gallon stock pot using concentrated boil. Triply bad news, as you may already be able to see where this is headed. The recipe called for various specialty grains, 13 pounds of dry malt extract. This is a 5-gallon batch. 13 pounds of dry malt extract and 3/4 pound of demerara sugar. Things started off according to plan. We steeped the specialty grains, added the malt extract, and made sure to thoroughly stir the viscous mess so we could be certain all the extract was dissolved before lighting up the stove and really getting things moving. While we waited for the batch to come to a boil, we kicked back the smug satisfaction, enjoyed a tasty beverage, and discussed how proud we would be of this batch. If you've ever made candy, you'll be familiar with concentrated sugar solutions' behavior when it comes to a boil. While this batch of wort wasn't even close to the consistency of candy, it behaved in much the same way, albeit on a larger scale. You see, when candies start to boil, the bubbles don't burst quickly. They tend to stack up on top of one another and quickly spill over the top of the pan if they aren't watched. They also don't dissipate as quickly when removed from the heat, and anything that spills is roughly akin to napalm. It sticks, it burns, and it's a total nightmare to clean up once it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
As the batch began to boil, it quickly became apparent that something was amiss. It began to creep up the rim of the stock pot and continued to do so regardless of the amount of heat we applied. In the throes of panic, we decided to ladle half the wort into a second pot and split up the boil in order to give us more headspace. Needless to say, we made a horrible mess of both pots, the stove pot, and our now shattered sense of competence. As both pots began coming back to a boil, something horrible happened. They both began to boil over. Since our solution the first time had worked so well, the clear decision was to get a third pot and continue ladling, fooling with the heat, and generally making fools of ourselves. Shortly thereafter, we enlisted my mother and added a fourth pot to the stove. Then we replaced the ladle with a small saucepan in a desperate attempt to move more quickly the wort between the pots. It must have been a sight to see the three of us feverishly ladling between 4 pots, trying desperately to get things under control. At some point, I looked on the table and saw something staring back at me mockingly. The 1.5-ounce, 60-minute hop edition.
Oh, no.
After cursing myself in any way I knew, I added the hops to the largest pot and watched in a mix of dismay and joy as the boil settled down within moments, leaving the pot only about 1/3 full of wort. We proceeded to add the other 3 pots worth of wort, bringing it back to our intended boil volume. There were burnt chunks of sugar and malt extract stuck to the sides of the pans. The stove top looked like a war zone, and we were all covered with sticky wort. It took quite a while for the burnt, ashy flavor to age out of the beer, but it actually turned out pretty pleasant, all things considered. Jesse says, just in case anyone is wondering, PBW does a pretty decent job at cleaning burnt wort off a stovetop.
I just have nothing to add to that. That's epic.
I hold in my hands the final
disaster.
The final disaster. Mike from Anchorage, Alaska. Early in my all-grain brewing days, I had my biggest disaster to date. While milling grains, the mill tipped, and a bunch of grain from the hopper fell onto my garage floor. There weren't any oils or chemicals on the floor, so I did my best to scoop up the grains while avoiding dust bunnies, pebbles, and other undesirables. It would all be filtered through the grain bed and boiled for an hour anyway, so no big deal. And the beer turned out really well. But that's not my submission. No, the grain spill was my worst disaster until September 8th, 2015. Let me back up, though, and mention that after brewing a raspberry wheat and putting it through secondary, I soured a gallon of it in a gallon jug with dregs from a few sour beers with live bugs. After several months, the beer had soured without incident and turned out well, so instead of dumping the yeast cake, I put a gallon of farmhouse ale on top of it, covered it loosely with foil, and let it be. A month later, I noticed fruit flies in the room where I had stored the jug. I uncovered it, and lo and behold, there were fruit flies on the foil, under the foil, and in the beer. And not just fruit flies. There were also 2 or 3 dozen larvae floating in the beer, dried up in the neck and dried on the outside.
They died happy.
I remained calm and collected and did what any rational homebrewer would do. I slapped on a nitrile glove, soaked my hand in Star San solution, and proceeded to scoop and scrape out the living and the dead and wipe off a bunch of thick, off-white foam that had appeared on the surface. Other than the yuck factor, the fruit flies aren't harmful, other than possibly carrying Acetobacter, so once I was satisfied the cleanup job was complete, I put on an airlock and let it be. A few days ago, I filled 2 bottles of the beer without sugar to see if it tasted okay. Other than being flat, it tasted fine. It was just starting to get a little sourness. A friend who'd heard the whole story had no problem with it and drank an entire bottle. And that is the story of how my maggot beer was born.
I'm glad we ended there.
You know, I told him you should add honey to it. You know what you'd have?
No, what?
A maggot braggot.
Maggot bracket. On that happy note.
You're out of beer, sir.
I am. I'm out of beer. That's my problem.
We're going to fix that.
Okay.
Well, thank you, sir, for sticking with me for another year.
You're welcome.
And here's to you have a little bit in there. Here's to a healthy and prosperous and happy 2016. Not only to us, but everybody listening out there. Thanks, everybody, for the stories. We will tabulate the results, and our favorite stories will get brew haulers, gear, and there may be some basic brewing bottle openers sent out as well.
You never know.
But thanks to the Brew Holler folks for donating the gear. Thanks again to Desiree and Dave at High Gravity for sponsoring the show. Thanks to the American Homebrewers Association for being a regular sponsor as well during this year. And thanks to Douglas Wierzinski for this
outstanding and former beer.
I've got a little left.
Well, yeah, I don't.
I've been talking this whole time.
I know.
It's wonderful stuff. So thanks to everybody for listening again. I can't believe, we celebrated our 10th anniversary this year. It's crazy.
Stunning.
Who knew?
Who knew?
All right. That's enough. Happy New Year, everybody. We will see you on the other side.